In this series, I will be explaining every single enchantment in RLcraft, as well as ranking them on a tier list of their general usefulness. However, before we begin, let's lay out some ground rules. We're going to ignore lost cities for this tier list since that's its own meta. This tier list is also not ordered in a specific way, it is simply worst to best based on tiers, nothing more, since it would overcomplicate things if we ordered every single enchantment inside their own tiers. Also, one last thing, huge thanks to Calebrune3's amazing enchantment guide and him being kind enough to let me use some of his footage to explain what enchantments do. Anyway, now onto the video. The WTF tier is enchantments that really suck and are god-awful to use, or enchants that make you go WTF.
Unsheathing has a max level of 1 and makes so if the enchantment is in your hotbar when you're hit, it'll swap to your main hand. There are sometimes bugs that make so this enchantment doesn't work, but you can just drop it and pick it back up, or just grab it and put it back in your hotbar and it'll fix itself.
The enchant basically removes a part of agency that you had. You had agency on when you wanted to swap your weapon, and now it's gone because you decided you wanted Unsheathing. And why give up agency when you can just press the hotkey to your weapon? This enchantment simply sucks. The following enchantments are all curses that are pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to waste any time on them. Curse of Rusting, Curse of Clumsy, Curse of Vulnerability, and Curse of Inaccuracy all suck because they're curses that don't have any uses. Defusing Edge does bonus damage to creepers, and has a chance to let you take the creeper's ability to explode. Yes, you can give a creeper a vasectomy in this game. I don't know why this exists, but I guess you can neuter creepers because that's something that should be allowed. This is wrong on so many levels. Heavyweight simply reduces your attack speed. Pretty self-explanatory is why you wouldn't want this enchant. Powerless reduces your damage with a bow. Do I need to say anything else? Inefficient reduces your breaking speed. Again, do I need to say anything else?
Freezing has a max level of 3 and has a 10% chance times level to apply slowness and mining fatigue to enemies. If the enemy already has those effects, however, it'll just increase the level of those effects, and at a high enough level, it freezes the enemies into a block of ice. As soon as the enemy is frozen into the block of ice, it'll take an additional 4.7 increased damage with a 1.1 times multiplier on the damage. The glaring problem with this enchantment is that when enemies freeze, the ice melts and turns into water source blocks. So good luck using this enchantment without griefing your own world.
This is the most annoying enchant ever. Just imagine having to deal with all that water. Why? And the suffocation damage isn't even that significant. This is just such an obnoxious enchant. Why would anybody use this?
Homing has a max level of 1, and it makes so when you right click a block, it'll make a noise if you're within 6 blocks of the ore the hoe is made from. This only works with iron, gold, and diamond hoes, but it can be kind of useful when you're strip mining and you're looking for diamond and you just want to right click and listen for the noise. Honestly, it's probably actually pretty good. I just like making fun of hoe enchantments.
This is probably the most random enchant in the game. I don't know what they were smoking when they came up with this, but yeah, it exists. And as for why you don't want it, iron, gold, and diamonds are all really easy to get from structures, and you should really not be mining for them. Honestly, I could probably just put it in find here because it's not detrimental, but it's just too random to not have in the WTF tier. It belongs here, not because of its badness, but because of how random and stupid it is.
Jagged Rake has a max level of 5, and it adds 1 plus 0.55 times the level damage to hoes. So at level 1, your hoe is going to be doing plus 1.55 additional damage, and at level 5, your hoe is going to be doing 3.75 additional damage.
It's sharpness, but worse, and for hoes. Why does this enchantment exist? Hopefully nobody's using a hoe for combat. Unpredictable is the final and very well possibly the worst enchant in the WTF tier. It makes damage dealt unpredictable from negative to positive. Negative damage will heal the enemy. Damage is randomized based on the current damage level. not only do you have a chance to heal the enemy, but you're also not going to be dealing consistent damage. You could do 100 damage one hit, you could do 2 damage the next hit, provided your weapon can do 100 damage in the first place. Why would you not always want your weapon to do 100 damage? Yeah, this enchantment sucks. The Detrimental Tier is basically the same thing as the WTF Tier, except the enchantments are better. They're still ones you don't want on your gear. Yes, they're bad, but at least they're not in the WTF Tier.
Thunderstorm's Bestowment has a max level of 6 and deals 7.5 damage in a thunderstorm, -3 damage if there's no thunderstorm, no damage boost if you're underground and there's a thunderstorm, and if you're underground and there is no thunder, it gives you -5.45 damage. It also has a 1.75% chance to make it thunder every hit if you're not underground.
Thunder is such a rare condition that you're going to have to rely on this enchant to make the weather thundering. And if it's not thundering, it's just going to be detrimental to you. And it doesn't even work underground. The vast majority of combat is going to be taking place underground, aka under one block. If you compare the positives and the negatives vastly outweigh the positives.
Lunar's Blessing has a max level of 5 and gives you -2.5 damage during the day, plus 2.5 damage at night, -3.75 damage if you're underground at night, an additional -2.5 damage if you're underground during the day, and an additional -2.5 damage if it's raining. So if you're underground at night and it's raining, you get -7.5 damage. Soul's Blessing is the same thing, except the day and night stuff are just swapped.
A potential plus 2.5 damage? And a potential -7.5 damage is absolutely insane. The negatives on these enchants vastly outweigh the positives, and therefore are detrimental.
Knockback has a max level of 3 due to an enchantment tome, and has one variation. Knockback 1 knocks enemies 4 blocks away, Knockback 2 knocks enemies 6 blocks away, and Knockback 3 knocks enemies 9 blocks away. Advanced Knockback 1 knocks enemies 5 blocks away, and Advanced Knockback 2 knocks enemies 8 blocks away.
Knockback will actually decrease your DPS since the mobs will be getting knocked outside your attack range, and DPS is quite important. Logic dictates that if you can do more DPS, that will mean the mobs will die sooner and therefore not be as threatening. Losing DPS for a bit of extra knockback is just simply not a trade-off I'm willing to make. Don't worry, I didn't forget to mention knockback on shields, I'll get to that later.
Flinging has a max level of 2 and is similar to Knockback, except it knocks enemies in a vertical motion. Flinging 1 knocks enemies around 2 blocks into the air, while Flinging 2 knocks enemies around 4 blocks into the air. Fling, which is an entirely different enchantment with basically the same name, is almost the same as Flinging. It has a max level of 2, and at level 1 it knocks enemies around 2.5 blocks into the air, and at level 2 it knocks enemies 5 blocks into the air.
Flame and Flinging both have the same issues as Knockback. They'll be knocking mobs outside your attack range. Flame and Flinging are definitely better than Knockback, however, they're still detrimental since they will be knocking mobs outside your attack range and reducing your DPS as a result. The vertical knockback is especially detrimental with flying mobs.
Butchering has a max level of 5 and deals 1 times your level additional damage to vanilla animals. Plus 5 damage to animals is pretty top tier, honestly.
It really does not take much to one-shot most vanilla mobs. And this enchant is incompatible with a heck of a lot, including sharpness.
Meltdown has a maximum level of 2 and gives you 5 plus 5 times your level % chance to create an explosion when you're hit. The explosion doesn't blow up any blocks, but it damages enemies and it sets your surroundings on fire. The fire from this enchantment can spawn cinders, and when the explosions occur, it knocks off 15 times the level durability from your armor. If you can help it, don't put Meltdown on your armor unless you're doing some specific run that really needs it.
The durability cost on this is absurd for such a lackluster explosion. Thankfully, most of the time it will not spawn tremors since the explosion is generated from under your feet. For example, if you are standing on the ground, the explosion is generated in the ground, which means the tremor does not have a valid spawning location. However, if there was not a block directly below your feet and you were in the air or falling or something like that, then a tremor could spawn. The cinders and tremors spawning doesn't really matter. The main issue is the obscene durability cost of the explosion.
As for axe exclusive enchantments, Penetrating Edge has a max level of 6 and deals damage equal to the enemy's armor divided by 3 plus 0.5 plus 0.16 per level. So at max level, it would be the enemy's armor divided by 3 plus 1.46 damage. It is important to note this enchantment does not penetrate armor, it just gives you bonus damage if the enemy has more armor.
As you can see from that clip, a zombie wearing full dragon armor with a lot of armor bars only took a whopping plus 2 damage from that enchant. On top of that, it is also incompatible with a heck of a lot, most notably Sharpness and Rune Piercing.
Levitator has a max level of 2 and applies levitation to enemies for 30 plus the level times 12 ticks at level 2 or 3 if the enchantment level is 1 or 2 respectively.
This is the funniest thing ever, but it's also not really that practical. This enchant really does barely anything and can be pretty detrimental considering you're losing a ton of DPS since you can't hit the mob when it's in the air, and losing DPS is obviously bad, but it can be funny, so I'll give it that.
Dragging has a max level of 2 and pulls enemies 2.5 times its level blocks towards you instead of away from you. Not super sure why you'd want to pull mobs toward you, but I guess it's kind of cool.
A bow is a ranged weapon, which is the whole reason it's good. Ranged weapons are really good because the mobs can't hit you while you're shooting at them. Dragging brings the mobs closer to you, meaning you can't shoot them for free, which is the whole reason you're using a bow for ranged attacks, which means mobs can't hit you. Yeah, dragging is counterintuitive to what you would want when you have a bow. So yeah, it definitely deserves a place in the Detrimental Tier. If this video taught you something useful, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications to keep up to date with this series. I plan to cover every single enchantment in the entire game. Also, I made a Discord server, link in the description.